Hello everyone and welcome back here in the auditorium and on X-Dream Events. I'm now connected with John from Squared Paper. Hello John.
Hello Stefan, how are you?
I'm fine. In this session we would like to look into the updates from your company, from Squared Paper, as well as hear about all the news about Busby, your main product. But prior to jumping into the topic of the news, let's elaborate a little bit on what is Busby. Could you please give us a high level about what Busby is?
Sure. So Busby is our integration toolkit, which we use when we're making any software or delivering a project or an integration for any customers. And it's got it's a fully functioning toolkit which allows you to build up your own workflow and integration systems using pre-built modules and things like helper functions, and all that's available in there already for you from the start.
So as you mentioned, it is a toolkit, kind of a framework. What are the core elements of this toolkit? How can I imagine, what is it put together from?
So right at the bottom of it, there's a messaging layer, and that's using an open source technology called RabbitMQ, and that's used in lots of places like banks and telephone exchanges to really quickly deliver messages. So you've got the messaging layer, and then you've got some core components around that. For example, managing the configuration from a web-based configuration editor, authentications for managing user logins and permissions, and one of the really key parts of the system is the workflow engine called the State Store, which comes with it by default.
So that sounds like it's built on a very robust and stable foundation. Would that mean it also is able to scale quite a lot, or can it use in a more distributed setup?
So there's plenty of options for scaling. When you set up the system, you can set up as many hosts that you want to run various parts of the system on, and you assign your services to those hosts, or nodes as they're called now. And that means you can easily assign a service to more than one node. What you can do is you can decide, it doesn't really matter where your nodes are running. They could be in the cloud, they could be on premise, or they could be a mixture of both. And using the helper functions, it's quite easy to make some logic to decide. For example, if you've made a workflow with transcoding, you could put in some logic to say, if I have, 100 transcodes and they're all really urgent, then in this case, I'm going to spin up some cloud transcoding capacity. For example, do the transcoding and then spin it back down again once I'm finished.
As you just mentioned, transcoding, what are the other type of third-party products or engines that you connect to?
So there's various third-party transcoders. First of all, we have an inbuilt command library around FFmpeg if you just want to use something built in, and that gives you the basics. Then you've got connectors for Telestream, sorry, the name is completely slipping me, for Capella systems, and various other third-party transcoders. All the standard ones out there, we probably have a connector for.
Yeah, I think we will come back to this topic later on when we talk about the news that we have also about Busby. Now, before stepping into the various news one by one, could you give us quickly an idea about what are the typical use cases for Busby? What are your typical customers that you have served the last years?
So the last couple of years that are typical, well, it's about a 50-50 split. The typical use cases are one type of customer where they have got some software developers internernally and lots of technical people, and they want to start a big project. For example, maybe a playout migration or some kind of workflow or APIs or things that they need to make, and they want to have a a stepping stone to get started, so they don't need to start totally from scratch. So customers who just want a toolkit and they want to do all the building themselves, that is one use case which is becoming quite common now. And in that case, we would provide them with instructions on how to set it up, and we provide time when they need to ask questions. So that's one typical customer. At the other end of the scale, we have, for example, many types of custom software applications which we've delivered to all sorts of customers. For example, we've got a horse racing archive which we've delivered, which provides a multi-view for lots of camera angles. We do lots of things like schedule translation. We do things like moving media based on schedule. So all sorts of basically a typical customer. It's difficult to say typical with a use case. A typical customer is someone who has a problem in the broadcast and media field, and they need some help solving it. That would be the typical customer, really.
Mm-hmm. So now let's look into the news one by one. The BUZZBee now supports something called resource groups. What is that?
So the resource groups is it basically allows you. That's a little screenshot there, as you can see on the configuration tool. And what we found is in most, I would say probably 90% of systems that we develop and we help our customers to develop, you need to have some persistence, and you need to have some little databases, but you don't. But they're never, well, hardly ever the same as other databases. So what this allows you to do is it's got this little graphical editor there, and it allows you to add your tables and columns and fields and set the data types and things. And then when you go to publish the configuration, what it does is it makes you a relational database in Postgres. It makes that for you under the hood. It creates the database, creates the tables, creates the indexes. And then it also creates you a user interface for allowing you to add and update the data. It's kind of a pretty basic user interface, just a grid view. But then the key part of that is it also gives you all the API calls that you need, so that in your other BUZZBee services and your workflow scripts, you can read and write from that database. So it's a really quick and easy way of getting small databases up and running to store things. Let's say you might have a customers table, or you might just want to store a list of transcode profiles which are dynamically updated. It's a quick and easy way of making a small database, but also giving you all the easy ways to access and update it as well.
So while it's still a fairly new feature, I know that you have customers for it already. So can you describe a little bit about the use cases that you see for this new feature?
So what we have is, in terms of the use cases for resource groups, well, all sorts. We've got some customers where they're using it to store information for doing schedule translating. So they might use it to do the mappings between the field mappings between an incoming and an outgoing schedule format. Other customers, there's one new customer, or newish, and what they're doing is they're using BUZZBee to build a whole business system to run their entire business from, because it's a lot of their business processes are workflow driven, but they also need to store things like customer data and order information in databases. And this is allowing them to flexibly build up their data structures which they need to use, but they can always change it again later on, and then it's all exposed and connected into the core BUZZBee workflow system.
I think that also brings us to the next topic. You've created a new plug-in interface for custom user interfaces. What are the possibilities for developers, and what features are supported in BUZZBee for such a custom user interface?
So this is a really cool new feature we've added, and this is because we thought one final piece we had of the toolkit, which was kind of missing. We already had the ability for customers to make their own backend and scripty kind of services. There wasn't quite the flexibility there to create your own user interfaces. So we've now added that, and it's now also the way which we develop our user interfaces internally, so it's constantly being updated and made easier to use. But basically, what it gives you is, for those technical people out there, developers, it gives you a NPM package which you can install, and when that installs on your computers, it allows you to develop then in Node.js using TypeScript, and it basically creates you a sample application. It downloads all the library code that you need to use, and then it provides some sample code to allow you to get started, and then all the calls that you can make to. So basically, that gives you connections to any other service on the Busby bus. So you can use your user interface to speak to any services. Let's say you want to speak to one of the database services that you created to pull data out of there, or you might want to, use a connector you've created to connect to a third-party system and get some data. And that allows you to bring all those bits of data back to your user interface, but you don't have to worry about how you don't have to worry about the API calls and how you get the data, because the sample code is there to help you do it, and everything's typed in there. So you can, for example, type Busby dot, and then it shows you the list of services which you can connect to, and you can get the data back to your user interface. And it obviously allows you to create custom permissions, so you can say which users and groups can do which action. So it's pretty flexible, and then it allows you to just, once you've finished, you can build it. So you can use Webpack to build up your application, and you just need to put it on a folder on the Busby server, and then it will run inside the main selector user interface and have the same authentication and login and all sorts.
So I know Busby as a tool that on one hand runs workflows and on the other hand can control live environments. Now I've just learned that you also have the new database built in. Could you give us some examples about what these new capabilities of building custom user interfaces would allow us? Is it only to control workflows or some processes, or is it even to control more like a collection of assets? So to I don't know, let's say to store something, to find something, to trigger workflows and things like that.
So in terms of, so you can obviously, like you said, you can use it to monitor workflows and speak to the databases. But other options which are useful are anywhere, and it is kind of tied in with other Busby user interfaces as well. And it ties in with one of the features which I was going to tell you about later on, which we've added, which is the form editing, which you can see there. You also, for example, you can create and edit your forms just there in the configuration tool, and you can just call the form lookup service to give you a schema on how the form should be displayed. So you don't need to even necessarily build your forms, but also it's as part of the Busby user interface selector. A feature which was added in the last couple of years is what we call the shopping basket. And what that allows you to do is, anywhere in the system, for example, it might be a workflow job or something in a database or in the media asset management UI, you can add those items that you find into a basket, and then later on you can go to your basket. So you build yourself a little collection, and you can go to your basket and you can check out, a bit like you do when you purchase something online, except in this case it doesn't charge you any money. You can then go and check out, select the type of workflow you want to run those assets through, or the collection of things through, and it will trigger a job in the workflow with the items you've added to your basket.
Yeah, so the basket, I think, is also a new feature that you just released with the newer versions of Busby, as you just referred to. So is it that the basket is part of the new capabilities of creating custom user interfaces, or is it something that can also be used standalone?
So the basket is built in to the user interface in framework, so you can see any application which you're in. If you have the shopping basket enabled in your configuration, then in the top right-hand side, you'll have a little basket icon, and you'll see anything that's been added to it. But as part of the plugin tool, which allows you to obviously create your own user interfaces, there is a component which you can just implement, and it's there already for you, called a basket item. So you can, by default, easily allow anything on your custom screen to be added to a basket just by implementing this component, which is built in and available for you to use.
Just to get it right, could I fill a basket also from a workflow, or does it somehow require me to fill it from something that I have stored in the database first?
No, you can basically fill it from many things. For example, anything in the user interface which we've enabled it for, or you've enabled it in your custom UI, you can add. So yes, you can go through and add workflow jobs in a workflow to the basket. Or assets, or for example users or files. You can browse files and folders on a server and add those also to the basket. So it's pretty flexible.
Okay, so we've also touched on the new forms editor earlier. Same question here. You explained it already a little bit, but could you tell us a little bit about the use cases and how that works in a workflow system? Or again, is it something that also wants to talk to a database to store something to find?
So the forms, you can use it to talk to a database, but probably the most common usage of the forms editor and packages is either starting off workflow jobs. So you need to, let's say you want to go and, I don't know, maybe have a workflow for booking a line to record channel or something. So you would have a form which would allow you to fill in like the channel and the encoding profile, or you might have something further down, like say in the middle of a workflow where someone needs to, I don't know, edit some metadata and approve it, or refer it to a supervisor. So you can basically build up your form in the form editor just by dragging in the fields you want to use. And then put that either at the start or in the middle of a workflow, just by then dragging in a form node in the configuration editor.
Okay, so to recap, form is used to start the workflow, then probably in the middle of the workflow, what is used there to enhance metadata or upload even more files?
Yeah, you can, yes, often for enhancing metadata, but also for uploading files. It supports this is the simple form package, and there's also an editor for something called survey.js, and that's an online free survey editor, but we've implemented their editor inside our configuration editor, which means that gives us extra benefits. So you can use you can develop complex forms with multiple pages and tabs and things, but it also gives the ability. We've added our own custom components to that. So, for example, as we've made it, because this is just a standard web, it makes standard web forms. So by default, it doesn't know about broadcast things. So we've added our own fields to support time code entry, and also for looking up. We have got fields which will go and look up entries. So let's say you have a drop down or a search for assets in our media asset management system, or a drop down might be filled out with data from the resource databases, for example.
Okay, understood. Just to close the loop, the forms editor can run fully independent from the custom user interface, correct?
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
Okay, good to know. Now let's focus on something that we have touched on earlier already, that have been the connectors to third-party tools. I know that you have developed various new ones. Could you please give us a little bit of an overview?
Yes, I can. We've developed quite a lot of connectors the last couple of years. We've been a busy couple of years working on projects, and most of the time when we make a project, we need to make a new connector, and when we make a new connector, it's then available for all customers. So we've got things, for example, Telestream Vid Checker we now support, Venera Pulsar, Automatic QC. We've also got some new drivers which we've added to support modular broadcast devices such as the EVERT product line. We can send messages to and from their modular cards, some stuff with ROS video switching, and so another one we did was controlling the Blackmagic Hyperdeck studios. We now have drivers for that, so you can trigger recording and playback on those. And just there is less exciting but quite useful for business systems integration. We've now got integration with the Cloud Active Directory, so Azure Active Directory, Amazon Active Directory, and Okta for enterprise logins into Busby.
So, I understand it quite well that you have the integrations to various, what I call like a processing engine. So something like a transcoder, a quality control tool that is part of a workflow. And I can imagine a use case, but we should touch on this in a moment as well. But can you give us a little bit of an insight? Why are you integrating with a video switcher, for instance, and this more kind of broadcast type of equipment?
Well, there was basically this will touch on one of the projects when we go through the use cases, which we've been doing later on. But we essentially added that for a customer where we needed to, as part of the workflow, as part of, so they have basically using a timed workflow, which is used to start an event, and as part of the event, it needs to do things. It needs to, for example, make sure that the incoming video feed is routed properly. It needs to set up the preset and program on a mixer, so the operator is got all the sources ready. Pre-populate the presets with a couple of sources and clips, and that's so basically because one of the projects we did essentially helped. The idea was that customers have got all their broadcast equipment, instead of having multiple control rooms, well, they have got multiple control rooms, but instead of having multiple sets of equipment for each control room, all of the equipment lives in 2 data centers. And then, for example, they can, and they're a sports broadcaster, and what they can do is they can then book. They can say, well, I need this event to be done by 3 people. Let's say it's soccer. So I need, I don't know, 2 MEs on a vision mixer with X number of sources. And basically they send that in a form, either manually or via an API from their scheduling system. And then Busby then works out the best allocation of equipment, because the equipment is shared, and because it basically can be, the vision mixers can be split up into multiple MEs. So you can allocate half a mixer to one production control room and half a mixer to another. And it basically, the way it works is when the staff go into their control room, they have a little touch screen on the outside, and they press that to say, we've arrived to work on our event. Busby then triggers off a workflow, which, for example, recalls the presets on the vision mixer. It does the routing. It sets up the control surfaces, and it even, for example, spins up a correct VMware Horizon virtual desktop with the right desktop shortcuts and things they need to operate that control room for that sports event. And then at the end of the event, when it's finished, they simply leave the room, press the button to say I'm done, and it tears everything down and puts all the equipment back in a pool, ready to be used by another customer, by another event.
Very interesting. That we are just about to talk about use cases, so let's go on with this. I think it makes it also very interesting for our audience to understand how Busby is used in practice. Let's focus on the other integrations that you did, for instance, with transcoders and quality control tools. Can you give us some examples where such integrations are used? What are the business purposes for that?
So one major customer which we've been working with in the last couple of years, they had a problem where what they provide is they provide subtitles and dubbing, etc. for their customers. So, for example, studios and film studios and producers. But what they have is they needed a way to send the content that needs to be worked on to their suppliers and receive it back again. But what they were having to do is manually copy everything across, manually trigger the transcodes. So what we've done is a couple of things. We've automated it, so we've created them watch folders where they can just simply drop in all the files they need for one supplier. And what it will do is it will trigger off a job for each one of those files. It puts them together in a batch. If it is a proxy video file, then it will run an FFmpeg transcode to overlay the supplier's name on the video, so that there's a watermark for security. If it's a PDF file, for example, it will also put a stamp over the PDF with the supplier's name. And for other files, it might just copy them into the folder, and it copies them into an Aspera share. And then when they're all in there, it then sends an email to the supplier to notify them to say, here's your link. You can go on here and download the files which you need to work on. So that's a good use case which we've done, and that's just the first step. There's lots of future things we'll probably be doing there to more automate it. But this was kind of a stepping stone to go, what can we do now quickly and easily to get something working for them?
I see. So I know that integration with scheduling systems is an important topic for you as a company. Can you give us some more examples in this area?
So yes, we've done quite a few things, quite a few extra schedule format imports. We fully support schedules from Morpheus, Grass Valley, and Evertz, all those various schedule formats. But what we do with it is generally, because for one customer we're doing it's called a playout user portal, where they are a playout provider. Their customers supply schedules via an API, or they upload from a portal, but that's in the format of their scheduling system. And the playout provider has one automation system vendor, so it translates the schedules all into that playout system format. But in the middle, we kind of create them in an internal Busby canonical schedule format. And the reason we do that is that means that then you could either decide to replace the playout system, or their customers could replace their scheduling system with a different format. And you only need to change the connectors that are necessary. You don't need to change the whole chain of things to get it working again.
I see. So on the other hand, scheduling of VOD assets for publishing is also a topic that you touch on. Could you explain us what you do with video on demand assets? Yeah,
so this has been a really fun project to work on. We've done this for a client in the UK, and what they have is they didn't have a system for scheduling their VOD content. The way it was working is I think they delivered to something like 20 different platforms, and they have 3 or 4 channels themselves. And every month, when they wanted to put something on catch up, or they wanted to schedule, some standalone box sets, what they had to do every month, and this took quite a few people to do this a long time, is they had to make a spreadsheet per platform, per channel every month, with all the assets in there and all the needed metadata and the start licensing dates and the end licensing dates. And that would take quite a few weeks to get that all prepared and find all the missing metadata and graphics files and things. And then if someone made a change in the scheduling system, then you'd have to go through every single spreadsheet and update them all again. So what we've done is we've made them a system which, first of all, it imports the linear transmission schedules, and then it imports any additional box set scheduling that they might have done in their scheduling system. And it also combines various other data sources. For example, they can search. So this screen here you can see is where they are doing their scheduling. So in that search box at the top, when they're searching for assets, so they're saying, and what that does is that searches through their MAM system, and it also searches through their archive with the metadata when they're searching in there. And that means they can then decide, I want to schedule this content, and down the bottom there you can say what platform it's going to, and for each platform you can set the start and the end dates, and that creates that in the schedule. And then at the end of the month, when they're ready to publish the schedules, it's quite flexible there, because each of the VOD platforms has a different format requirement for their schedules. So for the platforms where it requires them to have an Excel format, it will create an Excel spreadsheet, but taking the data from the jobs in the workflows. And for some of the platforms, and moving forward, this is what we're helping them to integrate more with their suppliers. It actually sends API requests directly to the suppliers' systems to tell them this asset needs to be scheduled at this time, and you should expect a file under this name, for example, and here's the poster image, etc., etc.
Thanks, John. So far we've touched quite on a lot of new features and also use cases according to that new features. Have you missed anything that we should mention, or have we covered all the news from Squared Paper?
I think we've probably covered most of it. There'll also be some exciting changes coming up in the coming year. There'll be a couple of changes to the way Busby can be deployed. So, for example, and this is a very rough roadmap, we have plans to start supporting containerization, because lots of customers have been asking about that. It's not there yet, but it's on the way. So you can watch this space, which will make it even more flexible in terms of scaling and where you want to run things. And yeah, that's probably, and I'm sure we'll have many more project updates for you again soon.
Thank you so much, John, for joining us here at X-Dream Events, here in the auditorium, to spread the news about Busby and all the new features and modules that are available in Busby. Thank you so much to all of you that have been joining us today, this afternoon, on x-dream.events. Please stay tuned. You can meet with John and me right now as a follow-up in our coffee bar. Just make your way to the start page of our event platform. From there, you can enter directly the coffee bar. We are very happy to discuss your use cases, your needs, and the other possibility is obviously next week, where we have our conferencing days and the demo days to again meet with us and get more insights. Thanks for the moment. Thanks back, John, to you.